All right. Okay, so again, my name is Kim Everett. I'm with Zuri Group. Zuri Group is a full-service technology consulting company. So we do everything from strategic consulting, CRM implementations, upgrades, configurations, training. We do a lot of digital presence implementation like websites and fundraising platforms, custom designs, custom developments, that sort of thing. So kind of the full gamut of technology consulting services for nonprofits. We are technology agnostic, and so what I mean by that is we work with pretty much all platforms, all software platforms, and we do system selections, and we're sort of what's the best fit for the organization and your requirements versus any kind of preferences we have for particular products or platforms. My examples, my experience is mostly with Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Engaging Networks platform. We've just, in the last year, my team has implemented about 60 Bowl for Kids' Sake and other peer-to-peer fundraising websites. So we have a pretty good history on that, but the Zuri Group team in general has implemented peer-to-peer platforms, peer-to-peer event sites across all platforms. And so I also have some examples of those sprinkled in. So by way of introduction for myself, I've been with Zuri Group for about 2 years. I'm the Director of Client Success and Support, and we focus on supporting our existing clients on their fundraising efforts, primarily on the digital side. So websites, email marketing, that sort of thing. And I am a board member of Big Brothers Big Sisters Central Oregon, and have also been a Big Sister for 10 years. And I've also been a participant in the Bowl for Kids' Sake fundraising event for 10 years locally. So just for fun, I thought I would add a picture here of our most recent Zuri Group team. Actually, this is 2 teams. But at last year's, or actually not even last year, last March's Bowl for Kids' Sake event. And so I thought that was kind of fun to show that, yes, I've been there. I've been one of those peer-to-peer fundraisers. And that's me in the upper left-hand corner. So now you know who's talking at you today. Okay, so getting started here on just kind of the basics. Everyone on this call already knows what peer-to-peer fundraising is. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have been interested in joining in this webinar. But just to make a point here and make sure everybody's sort of on the same page. So peer-to-peer fundraising is, the people who are your supporters asking their friends and family to support your cause. And we're living in this new interconnected age where everybody has an expanding network, and really it's important to leverage that. The other thing is that oftentimes people have a little bit of confusion. They think peer-to-peer fundraising and crowdfunding is the same thing. So I wanted to point out the subtle differences between the two. Crowdfunding is primarily when someone, your organization or a person or, could even be one of your supporters, creating a campaign page and asking for donations. So the call to action on a crowdfunding page is donate. Whereas with peer-to-peer fundraising, there's 2 calls to action. So whether it's your agency's campaign or event page, or the people who have created fundraising pages and spread the word about the event, your call to actions on your campaign page are either donate or register to fundraise, become a fundraiser. Could also be become a volunteer at the event. So you could potentially have 3 calls to action on yours, and then your fundraisers would have, donate and, join my team, or, set up your own fundraising page, or that sort of thing. So that really helps get the, sort of get the word out. And, what we're seeing is that peer-to-peer fundraising is a growing and evolving trend. It's not going away anytime soon. So it does need to be part of an organization's overall fundraising strategy. Okay, so diving into the meat of the agenda here, what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time is that we have these $0 fundraisers, and what can we do about it? So, what are the industry trends surrounding it? What are other people experiencing? What are the top 3 reasons why people don't fundraise? And then sections 3 and 4 will really dive into the meat of ways to change that. So the strategies, the coaching, the communication, adding an element of competition and kind of talking through all those things. Then we'll talk a little bit about post-event analysis, and then we'll review 2 case studies. So let's start by just kind of exploring what that, why is this important? What does that $0 fundraiser cost you? So in addition to kind of the obvious things, right? Food and wine or beer or Pepsi or whatever, the support staff it takes, and the more you may have volunteers, but the more participants you have, the more volunteers you needed, and then the more support staff is needed to manage those volunteers. And then there's the permits and the venues and all the logistical items from where you hold your event. And then the t-shirts and swag and hats and cups and mugs and whatever else you give away or are part of the sort of the prizes, if you will, of the event. So those are sort of the obvious things. And then you get into some of the soft costs, right? So, some databases charge more money, per record you have. So if you have more participants, that means more records, that means more money. Many insurance for, insurance costs for events charge on a volume basis. So, that could be a potential cost as well. And let's see, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure everyone's muted here. Heard a little background noise. Okay, good. And then, so looking at this from the sort of the industry trends perspective, people often ask, okay, well, industry-wide, what is, how many people actually do fundraise, or what are the targets? What are the averages here? So I took a look at the Blackbaud 2016 peer-to-peer fundraising study, and it varies widely. They split the study off into different types of events and grouped them and then calculated the numbers. So you can see here that for cycle events, they actually have a really high number of people who do actually fundraise. So only 31% did no kind of fundraising at all, whereas 5Ks, 85% didn't do any fundraising. So that's kind of an interesting spread, but I would say if you had to make an average out of it, even though it varies widely by event type, you could say that probably about 50 to 60% of fundraisers, of participants don't fundraise. The other interesting thing to note about this study is that they broke people into categories, these additional subcategories. So, there are people who fundraise only, so just asking other people for money, versus the people who self-donated only. So, maybe weren't comfortable asking their friends and family for money, so they just made a self-donation. Versus the people, these are sort of the holy grail of fundraisers, people who self-donate and fundraise. And that's really key. Those are the most valuable people to your peer-to-peer programs, because they feel passionate enough about the mission that they fundraise themselves they donate themselves and they ask their friends and family to donate. So those are really, that's our goal. We want to get people to this level here. So looking at some more industry trends about participation and retention, participation rates in traditional peer-to-peer fundraising events declined between 2015 and 2016. However, fundraising dollars raised did not decline at the same rate. So what that could indicate is that organizations are working hard to coach existing participants to fundraise more effectively. Another thing it may indicate is that people are kind of siphoning off into DIY events. So kind of their own do-it-yourself, non-traditional type events. The other trend is that retention showed declines in all event categories except cycle, which is interesting. I think the people who are passionate about cycling stay passionate about cycling and the mission. But this does show a need to address both retention and acquisition for fundraising events. And then the third one here, returning participants raise significantly more than new participants. And that's, that seems logical, and exploring that a little bit more, I would just add to that you have to, the first step is getting those people motivated and connected with your mission, and getting them to come back the next year is the second step. And what actually studies have shown that people who are $0 fundraisers 1 year, when they come back the next year, they will still be $0. 50% of those people will still be $0 fundraisers. So you have to get to them in that first year and help get them motivated, or whatever the strategies are, which we'll explore next, so that they go from the $0 fundraisers 1 year to the actual fundraisers the next year. And then maybe over time they get to that, self-donate and fundraise level. But the people who were, so what we're looking at here is then the people who were already doing some sort of fundraising, more of them did fundraising when they returned the next year. And in that endurance category, that number was 15% higher the next year. So it's a pretty significant jump. So let's talk a little bit about then the engagement, the industry trends around engagement. So the most common one is actually using the online tools given to you. So, the people who use the email tool or use the social media tools are going to be more effective. They're going to raise more money. And in fact, 2 to 11 times more than people who don't use the tools. People who update their personal page. So, upload a photo and edit the story to, talk about their connection. Those people raise between 7 and 18 times more than the people who just use sort of the standard stock page. And then team captains, that's a big one. So in general, teams raise more than individuals, right? Because there's more people, and that, that makes logical sense. But the team captains themselves raise more than the other team members and or individual participants. And in fact, significantly more. I mean, if you look at this team captain column here, they raise more than the other two combined in most cases. So those team captains are really the ones, those are your most valuable sort of stewards of your mission, and those are the supporters. If you don't have time to touch everyone and give them coaching and help, focus on the team captains, because those are the ones that are gonna produce the best results for you. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the trends and what's going on in the industry. So you've got that 50% of people, let's just use round numbers, that don't fundraise. So why don't they fundraise? Let's dive into that a little bit. So the first one is fear. I think anybody who's ever been in sales or had to go from non-sales to sales position has the fear of asking, right? The fear of asking people for money, fear of what they'll say, fear of how they'll be perceived. They don't want to be bothersome or that sort of thing. But there's ways to overcome that fear, and we'll discuss that in the next couple slides here. And then that inconvenience is the second factor. So, and inconvenience can encompass a lot of different things, right? So it can, maybe they just don't have enough time, or they're, not really motivated, or it's too much work. Maybe you don't have a good online tool, or the tool they got confused and they sort of gave up. They ran into a snag and gave up. But, in all those cases, what that really means is that they don't care enough. They're not connected enough about the mission to spend the time and energy it takes to do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can motivate them, or how you can get them more connected with the mission to overcome that inconvenience factor. And the third one kind of surprised me when I was doing my research on this. They were never asked. And you would assume that people would, we would assume that they would assume that it's a fundraiser, so of course you fundraise. But apparently that is not the case, and people don't necessarily know how, we know how peer-to-peer fundraising works because we deal with it every day. But if you pull someone off the street into one of your events, you have to explain to them how it works, and you have to ask them to fundraise. And in fact, surveys show that over half of the $0 fundraisers say they were never asked to fundraise. They just didn't know. So, okay, we can work with that. So let's talk about overcoming that fear part. The fear can stem from either the fear of the technology or the fear of making the ask. So giving people the tools they need to overcome that fear is part of it. So, providing that easy to use, mobile friendly platform is a key one. Making the registration process as easy as possible. So in this screenshot on the right here, this is from the Heart and Stroke Jump for Heart on the Luminate platform. And this registration process is really, as step 3, like step 1, choose your province. Step 2, choose your city. Step 3, choose your school. And then you click join, and then you fill out your information and you're in. So very streamlined, easy to follow process. And then another thing is, wherever you can, pre-populate your page templates, the story, your email templates, your thank you messages, anything and everywhere you can pre-populate people's, fundraising pages for them. That is, that's the easiest thing, because it's much easier for someone to edit a fundraising page than to start from scratch and sort of, fill out something. No one likes staring at a blank piece of paper and having to write something. It's much easier to edit something. So you want to give them those tools, and then give them the tools to use, to actually do the fundraising, right? So, make sure whatever fundraising tool you use, it has the ability for them to share on social media and send out an email directly from their page, and have, this one is SMS text. So, make it as mobile friendly and one click, sort of the Amazon one-click philosophy as possible. So this is a screenshot from the Engaging Networks platform, peer-to-peer fundraising tool. And then show them how to use it. So, this could be an area that could be very labor intensive for your team. But the reality is that some demographics will only need a little checklist, or, a couple of quick bullet points to know what to do. And then there may be some that will need, some demographics, particularly older folks, will need either a video or, longer instructions, or you may even need to actually show them how to use it, or perhaps even do it for them. So that's where I say it could get a little labor intensive, but, if you have to prioritize with the people who are, your strongest supporters or your team captains, and that'll be kind of the place to start with that. And then, reinforcing that the small donations matter is also a key point, because you may have people that are afraid to ask their friends and family for money because they think, there's like, oh, I'm a poor college student and none of my friends have money, and so I don't even want to, bother, or I don't want to make them feel bad, or, that sort of thing. but, encouraging them that even a $5 or $10 donation matters. That's the whole point of the peer-to-peer fundraising philosophy is, a large volume of small donations is what makes this so popular. And you may also want to consider evaluating and changing the donation dollar amounts on your donation page. So, maybe instead of your donation page starting at $25, maybe it starts at 10, because you don't want to alienate those people. So just, a couple things to consider there as you're considering your demographic and how to get people over the hurdle of their fear of doing something. And then another way to help with overcoming the fear is actually to have your staff each create a page. So in the case of, so I had an interesting debate about this at the Big Brothers Big Sisters of America conference when we talked about this topic, because some agencies require their staff to create a fundraising page and fundraise for every one of their events. Others compensate their staff with money or a day off for participation. So, whatever your culture is and however you want to structure it, there's a lot of value to having your staff participate with the, with the peer-to-peer fundraising side of your events. And, not only will they feel more comfortable with it and be able to answer people's questions about it, but you could also spread a little bit the sort of coaching piece of it and have, for example, so in this case with Big Brothers Big Sisters, let's say you have a big brother who you really want to create a fundraising page, and they already have an existing relationship with the match support specialist. So you have the match support specialist reach out to the big brother to coach him through the page and ask him to fundraise. He's going to be more receptive because he already has a relationship with that person, as opposed to someone else from your agency, like your event coordinator, who reaches out and, they know them or they know of them, but they don't have a relationship. And so they're a little less likely to participate in that way. So the other tactic here with making sure that people are connecting with your mission and, kind of speaking towards how to motivate them or how to connect them to get past that inconvenience factor is exploring ways to have them connect with your story, with your mission. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. This first one is the Big Brothers Big Sisters mission statement, which is good, which is nice, which I like, but doesn't necessarily drive me to take any sort of action. The second one is a little more tangible. So, now we're talking about, oh, wow, it actually takes $1,200 to support a match for a year. I didn't know that. I thought it was just all volunteers. And, and then you talk about, well, what does it take to recruit and train and match up and run background checks and, match them up with the little. And then you start realizing, wow, that does take a lot of money. So, that one resonated with me when I first heard it. But the most impactful way to get your message across or to get people to connect with your mission is the emotional connection. So when you bring it down to a specific, hey, this is Jimmy, he's been on the waiting list for 7 months. He really wants a big, he really needs that, being able to get out more in his life and that male role model and all those things about the program that makes the program so wonderful. People will connect with this. And in fact, studies have shown that when they did some sort of side-by-side A/B testing, comparing an emotional ask versus a intellectual ask, and the emotional ask was twice as effective. They also kind of taking the study one step further, put the emotional ask and the, takes $1,200 to support a match on the same communication, and it didn't perform any better than the emotional ask by itself. So you can put the two together if you feel that's more impactful. But in in general, people will respond to that emotional connection. And so that's a great way to get people to connect with your story when you're talking about, trying to motivate them. So then we can talk here a little bit about going from awareness raising to fundraising. So what we mean, kind of what we mean by that is you can have, you can say, okay, well, even though 50% of the people that show up to my events don't fundraise, at least, optimistically, they're going to be future fundraisers. And that's great, but you have to do something to turn them into future fundraisers. So what is it you can do that to cultivate that? And setting a registration deadline is a good sample of that. So for example, if you set that registration deadline 2 weeks ahead of your event, then that gives people a couple of weeks to actually do that fundraising, versus if somebody just registers on the day of and walks in, there's no time for them to fundraise, and most people won't do any significant fundraising on the day of the event. So the other one then is to consider adding a required or suggested fundraising minimum. So if you're not quite ready to go for required fundraising minimums, maybe you start with a suggested fundraising minimum. So you pre-populate, when someone registers for the event, it pre-populates then a suggested, okay, $100 fundraising minimum. And they then kind of have that expectation. They may or may not meet it, and you may or may not go, try to collect it later, but at least it's part of the expectation up front. And then taking it one step further, you could make it required. And we'll talk a little bit about that in our case study. The other thing you can do is ask them to make a self-donation during the registration process, or once they've registered. And, this kind of speaks to those two, you've got the people who self-donate, the people who fundraise, and the people who do both. So, you can ask them to start there. And, that helps them fundraise. If they make a self-donation, they're showing their commitment to the mission, and they're also maybe more comfortable asking other people for money if they've donated themselves. And this other, making swag dependent on fundraising minimums. So this one I like a lot too, because instead of, somebody's like, let's use the scenario, somebody registers for your event, and it's $25 registration fee that includes a t-shirt. So that's great. They sort of feel like, okay, I've paid for my entry and I've paid for my t-shirt. But what if you changed that around and said, let's do $100 fundraising minimum, and if you reach that, you get the t-shirt. And so, kind of flipping that around and making it dependent on the fundraising minimums, so that, if they pay $25 or $50, you're still raising that money, but you don't have to have the expense of the t-shirt unless they actually raise $100. And this example on the bottom is that Jump Rope for Heart, where they had the different fundraising thank you prizes. So I think that illustrates it really well. Okay, so then let's talk about registration fees. So registration fees seem like a simple and easy way to recoup the event-related expenses, but they're not without their drawbacks. And actually, there's potentially even more upside to not charging a registration fee. So the pros of the registration fee charge is that you can sort of say, okay, I want to make sure that I get a minimum of $50 per person to recoup those event-related expenses, and that is a known entity for budgeting. That if we have 100 people register times $50 each, that's $5,000. I know I'm going to get $5,000. But it does inspire a transactional mindset. So it makes sort of leads people to believe, like, I've paid my registration fee, that's all I have to do. And so there's not a lot of upside potential unless you're really driving the point home that fundraising is expected and there's a fundraising minimum and that sort of thing. So you may want to, if you do a registration fee, you may want to combine it with a fundraising minimum, or if you get rid of the registration fee, you really promote that fundraising minimum that you can, push people into a larger upside.
She doesn't do the event though.
Oh, I hear a little background noise. I'm just going to make sure everybody will just make sure that you are self-muted, or I will see if I can make sure everyone's muted. Okay. All right. So, moving on here. Okay, so now let's get into a little bit of the coaching part of things. So, we talked earlier about the, 50% of the people said they weren't asked to fundraise. Okay, well, so let's ask them. Let's just ask them and then ask them again. And put it in your registration process and put it in your follow-up email and put it in your, mass follow-up email communications and put it on your survey. And basically, there's even suggestions of putting fundraiser into the title of your event if you're not getting good traction on this. And Donor Drive did a great white paper on this, talking through a lot of these items. So that was one of their suggestions. And then ask them to tell a story. So this gets back to that engagement of, make sure that they are, if you can get them to update their page with their photo and a story about how they connect to the mission, that will greatly increase their fundraising efforts. And then same thing with asking the participants to share on social media and email and text and anything they're comfortable on. Because remember, the people who actually use the online tools raise between 2 and 11 times more than people who don't. So another area here then is the communications. So, what are you doing to communicate with your fundraisers leading up to the event and during the sort of the fundraising period? So, monitoring that activity, running reports, investigating, kind of who's doing what. So whatever you can do to really reach out and keep touching. So, this email sort of series here at the bottom is, maybe splitting it off into the active versus the inactive fundraisers. So the active fundraisers get a certain set of emails, at preset, weekly or every other day or whatever you do times. And then the inactive ones get a different series. And, maybe that different series includes tips on how to use your fundraising page or how to overcome, the fear of the ask, or that sort of thing where you're, trying to get reinforcing the point that they're expected to fundraise, and then also, sort of how to overcome it. And then the, sort of celebrating the win. So, acknowledging people getting to certain goals. So, maybe send them an email when they hit 25%, and then 50%, and then 75%, and then 100%. And then when they get to 100%, perhaps you ask them to raise more. And you send them a really positive, congratulations, you've hit your $100 and you've earned the t-shirt, and that's great. And, you're doing such an awesome job. Can you keep going? And here are the reasons. Here's, let me tell you a story about Jimmy, and here's the reason why you should keep going. And maybe there's also a second tier incentive, like, okay, now when you get to 250, you get the hat, or, something like that. So kind of keeping up that momentum, keeping that flow of positive information going is key. And then, even if it's small amounts. So kind of going back to the people's fear of, my $10 doesn't matter, but, maybe encourage people, if you have these inactive people that, finally get a few dollars on their page, maybe that's a big deal. You make a big deal out of that, so that they're like, oh, hey, cool, it does matter. Like, oh, that $10 does matter. Okay, well, maybe I'll go for 20. So And then let's talk about competition here. So competition can be a really wonderful way to motivate people. So, but don't lose the story, right? So, this is about the mission. This is not about crushing the other team, but it could be a little bit about crushing the other team. So, if you can find people who, so say, for example, you can find a local bank or a local, restaurant or coffee shop or something that has a competitive relationship with one of the other local banks or coffee shops or restaurants, and that you could get one to challenge the other to see who could raise the most. That could be a really fun way. So, you started out with one team who was motivated, and then you asked them to challenge another team, and then, they'll be motivated by the competition aspect, and then hopefully you can also, teach them about the mission along the way. And then you've got two teams. Teams raise more money than individuals, so now you've got two teams going after the highest prize. And that could just be bragging rights, or you could actually offer prizes. And the same thing, so then putting this information out there for people to see is also motivating. So having a leaderboard of teams or participants or, companies, if you're doing company matching or things like that, those can be really motivating for people because they can go back and check and see who's in the lead, and kind of continues that spirit of competition. So this last screenshot, these are from the Engaging Networks platform with some of their widgets available. And then this one is from Classy. This is from the Lustgarten Walk. So you can see just kind of some different examples of leaderboards. And I like this one and kind of the way they slice and dice it here with the top fundraiser, most donors, top team, most members, like just giving a lot of different categories of people to excel in, and, celebrating different scenarios. I mean, these happen to be the same two people in each, but this could be 4 different people. And so now you're sort of highlighting lots of different people's efforts. One caveat about competition is that I would just say, make sure the prize, if you are going to do prizes for top fundraising teams or individuals, just make sure the prize is motivating. So, my story on that is that in our local Big Brothers Big Sisters chapter, we had a top team fundraising prize for years. And the same company, Hayden Homes, won it every year because Hayden Homes was totally invested, and they rallied all their employees, and the employees would ask the vendors, and they would raise, $9,000, $10,000, $11,000 every year, and then the next highest team would be like $2,000. So that was great for Hayden Homes, but it was demotivating for all the other teams because it was sort of like, well, why even bother, because Hayden Homes is just going to win it every year. So last year we decided to have top 3 top fundraising teams prize, so that we could encourage those 2nd and 3rd place teams to really go after it. And so that worked, and those, now the 2nd and 3rd place teams actually had, something to compete for, and they were in the running. And then what ended up happening is on the day of the event, the 4th place team saw that they were in 4th place, and they passed the hat around to the team again, and ended up collecting enough donations to move into 3rd place to win the prize. So it was, people were engaged, it was fun, they competed, and the mission raised an extra $500 because of that competitive factor. Okay, so now you've gone through and you've coached people, you've helped them, you've provided them good tools, you've had your event, you've thanked them for participating, and now it's talking about the what's next for next year. So what I would recommend is doing that reporting and analysis piece within 2 to 4 weeks of the end of the event, while it's still fresh in your mind, while you still, remember the things that went well and didn't go well. And then do that planning for next year within a month. So, maybe you get your staff together and you do that exercise. What do we stop? What do we start? What do we change? And evolve it for next year. So this is not, peer-to-peer fundraising is a constant state of change. And so you need to evolve your plan each year based on last year's learnings. And then also keep doing that off-season outreach. So in between the end of this event and the start of the fundraising for next year's event, do send out some, some encouraging emails, send out some social media posts with pictures, maybe, congratulate the winners again, encourage people to come back next year, and then, and include your story, your mission messaging, easy for me to say, in those, in those communications. So remind them why they did it and why they connect with your mission. And then also take that opportunity to update your coaching materials. So especially for your team captains or team leaders, that's, again, those are your most valuable participants. So you want to make sure they have the best resources available to them. And then this last one is, kind of an interesting food for thought. So we see organizations responding to, sort of the year-over-year retention challenges by, doing these, sort of 1 through 6 items, but diversifying your peer-to-peer portfolio by adding, a non-traditional or, something creative, something specific to, maybe you have a board member that likes to play cornhole and he has a cornhole barbecue fundraiser. I mean, you can pretty much take anybody's hobby or anyone's interest and turn it into a DIY fundraising event. So, get creative, offer your supporters the technology to do it and the advice on how to do it. But, you may spin off a little bit from the standard, like we do our one walk and our one gala a year, and maybe now you add in a sprinkling of DIY events. So just kind of a food for thought on that one. And then let's talk through a little bit of our case studies here. Okay, so this one is published by Classy, and this is about the Y in Central Maryland, their Turkey Trot 5K. So this is an interesting growth trajectory here because in 2012, they raised about $500 in peer-to-peer fundraising. And then in 2013, they switched, they implemented the Classy platform, and all of a sudden they had, peer-to-peer fundraising, and they raised $41,000. And then the next year, they, so at the end of that year, they analyzed their event, they evaluated, what else they could do. And the following year, in 2014, they combined the registration and the fundraising process. So, again, it's combining that self-donate and fundraise. And then in 2015, they, made a few more tweaks, really fine-tuned their engagement and, sort of communication strategy, and increased the fundraising minimum. And so you'll see in that year, they increased participants by 19%, but the fundraising went up more than that. So, they were sort of more effective in their fundraising, and, the people, each person was raising a little bit more. So, the key points here are the online fundraising platform, really putting that participants' experience first, as far as mobile-friendly tools and easy registration process. Communication, that extensive reporting and analysis to figure out what to do better next year, and then that year-round communication, and then just the pictures and the fun, and sort of reinforcing that it's a fun event and keep people engaged. So then our second case study here is the Children's Hospital in Dartmouth Hitchcock. So they call it the Chad Hero event, and it's run, walk, hike, they've got a obstacle course, they've got all kinds of things. But they really reinforce this hero, sort of theme. And what they said was that the year that they didn't have a required fundraising minimum, they had a suggested fundraising minimum, and then they had 25,000 in unsatisfied minimums. So they tried to recoup that, but they only got about 3,000 of it in follow-up emails and letters, and it was, a significant amount of work. So they switched to a required fundraising minimum and collected credit card information so that they could automatically charge people for the shortfall in the fundraising minimum. So my sort of emotional response to that was, ooh, that seems very heavy-handed. But I think what they did was they really framed it well. So they expanded the communication around that, talked about it, talked about why, people would put their credit card information in when they registered, and they understood that they were going to get charged if they didn't meet their goal. So they gave incentives to exceed those expectations. So again, kind of along the lines of that theme of heroes, heroes don't just do the bare minimum, heroes exceed expectations, and here's, some prizes or some things you win if you exceed those expectations. They did a post-race survey, and 70% of the people said they knew they were expected to raise money. So that's better than the 50% average. And then, as I mentioned before, they collected credit card info. So they really kind of streamlined that process and, raised $25,000 more year over year. So this is on the Donor Drive platform, and so you can see a couple screenshots here, but they also have the leaderboard. So, again, really promoting that, the competition and the teams versus participants. You can see it's consistent, teams raise more. But so I thought that was an interesting one to point out in case you're considering how to handle fundraising minimums, suggested versus required. Okay, so I hope, my hope for this presentation is that you have taken away 1 or 2 or 5 usable tidbits to go explore on your own. And my kind of summary here of key takeaways is that, this peer-to-peer thing is not going away. So keep working on evolving your strategy and exploring it and making it part of your overall fundraising strategy. It's much more effective when you have easy online tools. You pre-populate the templates and you provide people with automations either by, messaging. So, kind of reminding them periodically to stay engaged, or automations actually within your fundraising platform to give them help text or, pop-ups, or, help automate the process any way you can to make it easy for them. Tell your story over and over again to engage and motivate people, because that's, especially really connecting emotionally with the mission. And asking them to fundraise, and ask them again, and ask them again, and then ask them a third time, because 50% of them say they weren't asked. So let's change that number. And then ultimately the goal is to coach people. So, want to develop a coaching strategy to get people to that, sort of the holy grail of fundraiser, which is the person who self-donates and fundraises. Okay, well, thank you for hanging in there with me. I know this is kind of long, but let me check here and see if we have any questions. I think I saw 1 or 2 pop into the chat. So a couple, let's see, when it says cycle, does that mean bicycle? Oh yeah, sorry, Delita, I should have caught that question earlier. The, all of those industry stats that talked about the cycling events, that does mean the bicycling, the like 25-mile bike races and that sort of thing. will you email these slides to attendees? Yes, I will be happy to. I will we'll send out a recording of this presentation as well. And then William said, I'd love a copy of the slides. Great, no problem, William. And examples of prizes. Okay, so I think that one came in when we were talking about the competition among teams. And some examples of prizes. So because, you know, and this is specific to team competition. If you have individual competitions, maybe the prizes are a little different. But some of our prizes were group things, like, you know, a party barge on a local lake, or a river rafting adventure. We also have this thing in Bend called the cycle pub, where, you know, 10 people sit around this giant bicycle bus contraption and cycle down the street and drink beer. So the top prize was the cycle pub. So, you know, the team, I would say team prizes, try to make them group events. You know, maybe it's a happy hour at a local restaurant, or a, you know, something you can do that incorporates the whole team getting to participate in the win. And then the individual prizes can, you know, can be a lots of different things, trips, dinners, you know, gift certificates. Those are a little easier to come up with. But yeah, okay, great questions. Well, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to email them to me. And otherwise, thank you so much for your time today. And I hope you have a great day and that you found some of this useful. Thanks. Bye-bye.